Well, I just have to tell you, like the most important speaker has already spoken. Thank you, Michaela. that was amazing. So, Marielle, thank you. Boy, you spoke from the heart there. And isn't it wonderful when you hear from an educator who really loves what she does? Thank you. But you just told us something, Marielle, that's so amazing, that when kids get that early start, it brings out all of their potential, and you get to see what they're capable of. And I talked to Michaela before we came out here, and I was so amazed when Michaela was talking, and I said, Michaela, you're very poised. How old are you? And she said, she's 8. And I said, wow, that's really amazing. She says, well, I'm about to be 9. So, but even for 9, that's really amazing. And it just says so much about what great educators do, but also says so much about what it means when a child gets to start as early as possible and when they can realize their full potential. So that is what we are here to talk about today. As Marielle said, I was here at PS 69 5 years ago, almost to the day. And that day was a moment of extraordinary excitement, and it was a moment where we were entering into really the great unknown. We were beginning the pathway to pre-K for all. And it was something the city had never done before. It was something that we all were trying to do on a scale that was far beyond anything ever attempted in this nation before. And honestly, we were filled with a lot of excitement, a lot of hope, but we did not know how it would go. And we were experiencing that joy of the first day of school, which is one of the greatest days in the year. But at the same time, we knew that we were witnessing the beginning of something very, very big. And that first group of teachers were pioneers, leading the way. And that first group of students were going to show us what was possible. And all of that began here in September 2014. Now, I will be honest, we all had our doubts. We all knew we were trying to do something very big, very fast. We also heard a chorus of critics. And many literally said this could not be done, that it would not possibly go as far as we hoped, that we wouldn't reach as many kids, that it wouldn't be good enough, the quality wouldn't be there, or we wouldn't be able to sustain it across such a big school system. Well, those critics were many, but here's what I say to them 5 years later. You obviously did not know the teachers of New York City, and the parents of New York City, and the kids of New York City who proved it could be done. In the last 5 years, I have not met an educator or a parent or even a student who told me that this wasn't going to work. I only met people resolved to make it work. And the largest school system in the country is a tough place to try something new. And we have come on a long journey in this school system. Some very good things, some things that have to be done very, very differently. But what we learned in these 5 years was that our schools were capable of greater things than ever imagined. That our schools could go a lot farther than people realized. And our principals, our teachers, all our educators, when given the tools, could do amazing things. Now, what we are able to say now, with these test scores today, we're able to say in a way more definitively than ever that pre-K for all is working. It's reaching deep into our communities. It's changing children's lives. We're achieving something that could not be done without that early start. But something bigger than that is now beginning to be clear, which is that for years and years, really generations even, Educators have been trying to break through on one of the thorniest problems in our society, which is that achievement gap, in which young people of color were not reaching the levels of their counterparts came from the majority. And good people for years and years have tried so many strategies to break through. But these results today suggest something working in a way we haven't seen before, a change that's actually getting at the heart of that achievement gap, a change that, when it plays out on a bigger level, could be the beginning of creating real equality in education. And I think folks gathered around me would agree, when you create equality in education, you create equality in our whole society. Yes. Today, for the first time, we are seeing real results, tangible results, that show there is a way to finally close that achievement gap. And I got to tell you, we could talk about that idea in terms of fairness and justice, and we can talk about it in terms of our whole city, our whole nation, but I also want to talk about it in terms of the lives of families, real people, and what that has meant. That achievement gap has meant, generation upon generation, good kids, kids with a lot of potential untapped, kids with good minds that never got the opportunity to show all they could do, year after year after year, wasted potential. And families that knew that they could do so much more for their child if only they could afford it. And think of how frustrating this has been for people. They knew there was something better for their child, but they just didn't have the money to pay for it. And somehow something as basic as education really got divvied up according to who had money and who didn't. Because that's the history of early childhood education before pre-K for all. If you had money, you could find that great early start for your child. If you didn't, there was a real good chance your child would miss that opportunity. And I've talked to parents who now look back with real agony at the idea their child could have gotten so much more. And I talked to a lot of parents who are now filled with a lot of hope that they know their child will get that strong early start. So, for the first time, we see this universal right starting to play out. And these scores today tell us something very important. But I want to emphasize, they only tell us how this begins, because this is just the beginning. The test scores that we're talking about today do not even reflect pre-K at its fullest. Because 2014 was a year we took a huge step forward. We got to 53,000 kids in pre-K, but it wasn't until the next year that we were able to make it a universal right. These test scores tell us there's something to be very hopeful about, but they don't reflect how much better pre-K instruction is today than even 5 years ago. Because our kids are benefiting more and more from educators who've gotten so much more training year by year. We figured out how to make it better all the time. And another very powerful fact, we're only seeing the beginning of what's possible because we're only talking about pre-K, but in just a few weeks, there'll be 20,000 kids in this city in 3K, getting a whole nother year of that early strong start, and that's going to be a universal right someday soon in this city. And I can only imagine what it's going to mean when every child gets that excellent education when they're 3 and when they're 4. That's when I predict great changes and an even more extraordinary effort to close this achievement gap. So something's happening here. We see the beginning of a real breakthrough. And we have a lot more to do to see it through. I'm going to just say a few words in Spanish and then turn it over to the Chancellor, who's going to tell you about these results and what we see in them, the challenges we still face for sure, but also the progress we see and the lessons we take from it. But I'd like to take a moment before I do that to say thank you to many people at the Department of Education who worked so hard, who really care about closing that achievement gap, who really care about making our schools the best they can be. And I hope for all of you, you feel this is a day that really shows that it was all worth it, how hard you worked. And I want to start with someone who was just one of the great architects of our pre-K effort, our Deputy Chancellor for Early Child Education and Student Enrollment, Josh Wallach. Congratulations to you. Thank you to our Chief Academic Officer, Linda Chen. Deputy Chancellor of School Planning and Development, Karen Goldmark. The Executive Superintendent for the Bronx DOE, Misha Ross Porter. And the Superintendent for District 8, Erica Tobia. And just a few words before I turn to the Chancellor. Nuestro sistema escolar ha pasado los últimos 5 años haciendo algo extraordinario a gran escala. Hoy los resultados demuestran que nuestro trabajo está funcionando. Esto es solo el comienzo. La ciudad de Nueva York continuará liderando el camino. And that is a good way to turn this to Richard to say this city is leading the way, and he's going to help you see in these results some really positive things that we're learning and the way forward. So my pleasure to introduce our Chancellor, Richard Carranza.
So thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I want to thank everyone who's here today for coming out today to PS 69 Journey Prep. I remember I came to PS 69 the first week on the job. I was impressed then, and I'm impressed now. So I want to welcome you here, and Mr. Mayor, I also, with your permission, want to say to Michaela, where are you? Michaela, you're hired, okay? Hired. Bring me a teaching credential, you're hired.
Wait a minute. Richard, is that legal?
We'll talk to Mom and Dad, but I think so. I also want to, before I say anything else, recognize some other folks that are really critical to our mission. I want to thank you, Mr. Mayor, for introducing so many of our team, but I also want to thank our Executive Director of our Borough Support Center, Nancy Safer, who's here. Thank you, Nancy. I also want to thank our Deputy Chancellor for Community Empowerment, Partnerships, and Communication, Hydra Mendoza. Thank you, Hydra. Someone else who's sitting up front is our Executive Director for Research and Policy Support, Michelle Palladino. Michelle will have all the answers when it comes to the data, because she's been living with them for the last 72 hours. And then I just can't help but recognize once again one of the many heroes, one of the 80,000 heroes we have in New York City, and we call them teachers, but I call them my colleagues. So I want to thank Marielle Mirville. Thank you for your words today, too. So we are excited to be here, and if you heard the tone in the mayor's remarks, you could sense the excitement to understand that 5 years ago, when this audacious idea that every 4-year-old in New York City, not the mid-level city in America, not one of the smaller cities in America, the largest city in America, every 4-year-old would, by birthright, have the ability to go to a high-quality pre-K experience. And we were going to do that in the short span of 48 months in New York City. People were right. I remember being somewhere else on the other coast thinking, wow, if they can make this happen. And you made it happen. So to your leadership, Mr. Mayor, congratulations. But I also want to be on the record and make this very, very clear. While we're celebrating some trends that we're seeing, this is a barometer. This is, in a sense, preview of coming attractions. I want to be very, very clear. And for all of our professional journalists that are here, I hope that you will take note of the fact that test scores are but one of many, many measures that we look at to gauge the health of a school and the health of a school environment. So as you write your stories and you report on your stories, don't just focus on the test scores. Look at the community. Look at the growth. Look at what children are learning. Look at what teachers are doing. Look at how that community has grown. Don't just report the test scores because it's but one of many. But it is an exciting day nonetheless because we can compare our results this year, year over year, and say that our students improved in both English language arts and math. We made particularly strong improvements in mathematics, and we improved in every community school district, which is 8,893 more students scoring proficient on their math exams as compared to last year. Our students in New York City continue to outperform their peers across the state on English language art assessments, and they continue to close the gap with their peers across the state in mathematics. We are within shooting range of the state averages in mathematics, so we're making up ground. Any educator will tell you that, as I've told you, that tests are just but one of multiple measures we look at, and one test score is not the be-all, it's not the end-all, but it gives us information to look at where we're going. So let's take a broader look at the picture in New York City schools, and that picture, my friends, is strong. We are also seeing record high graduation rates, record high college enrollment rates, and record low dropout rates. And to all of our teachers, our students, our parents, we are very proud of you. Know that this is something to celebrate, and it's your hard work that makes it possible. And I also want to hone in on our third grade scores, as our mayor has spoken. You see, when I first sat down with Mayor de Blasio about 18 months ago and decided to come to New York City to become chancellor, one of the big reasons was the city's investment in early childhood education. You see, the research is clear. There is no question that high-quality early education is a game changer, particularly for historically disadvantaged students in historically disadvantaged communities. And now, for the first time, we are beginning to see the promising signs that a free, full-day, high-quality pre-K for all in our third grade, those test scores are being reflected in that high-quality pre-K. We know pre-K is working from the high-quality ratings of our pre-K programs, from the positive feedback from parents and teachers, the fact that a year in pre-K can save a family, think about this, $10,000 a year in child care costs. And at the same time, they're receiving high-quality educational experiences. We know our pre-K students go to kindergarten with academic and social skills, but more importantly, a true love of learning. Yet today's results offer another promising sign, that our third graders are making greater gains on English language arts and math than their New York State peers, and that's a big deal. Students who went through pre-K for all are outperforming students who didn't. Let me repeat that. Of the students that had the pre-K for all experience versus students that didn't in that initial cohort, students that had the experience are outperforming, as measured by the third grade assessments, students who didn't. And we're seeing promising narrowing of the opportunity gap among Black and Hispanic students who attended full-day pre-K. That also is a game changer. As someone who's been an educator in 5 states, in 5 different systems, I will tell you that the opportunity gap is persistent, and it plagues us in our education work. Yet in New York City, we're starting to see the signs of narrowing that opportunity gap. And I want to be clear again, no student or program should be judged on a single test score. And much of the research around our early education suggests that pre-K has even greater payoffs as students go to middle school, to high school, into college, and beyond. So this is truly a preview of coming attractions. In fact, Professor James Heckman, recently released a study suggesting that free, full-day, high-quality early education has a positive impact on children of parents who attended pre-K. And I also want to zoom back out just a bit. Pre-K for all is the foundation. It gives our students the skills and tools they need to hit the ground running in kindergarten. And then those same students are benefiting from our universal literacy approach. And now that's reaching every one of our schools. As we head into this new school year, the 2019-2020 school year, we are strengthening instruction across our schools and building on these accomplishments. We are prioritizing improving instruction and advancing learning with our Instructional Leadership Framework, the ILF, and principals from across New York City will be assessing their current curriculum and student outcomes and developing plans to meet the needs of every one of their students. This isn't the bells and whistles. It isn't the big announcement of a new initiative. It's the hard work of educators using pedagogy and curriculum to inspire children to help them master a set of knowledge. So we will continue on this path to build on our equity and excellence for all agenda that we've put in place and to turbocharge our push to deliver education that every New York City public school student deserves. Again, I want to thank PS 69 Journey Prep for opening your doors to us in the final weeks of summer. And congratulations to our students, our teachers, and our families. I'm excited for this school year and for the new heights our students will reach. And before I share a few very brief words in Spanish, I also want to recognize another one of our deputy chancellors who is here with us, LaShawn Robinson from School Safety and School Climate. Thank you for being here, LaShawn. Tenemos mucho gusto y estamos con mucho orgullo de estar aquí para celebrar que este año nuestros estudiantes han demostrado acontecimientos académicos superiores a los del año pasado. Y es importante reconocerlo porque nuestros estudiantes en este examen es semejante al examen del año pasado, entonces se puede hacer la comparación. Y como también quiero decirles a nuestros padres de familia que un solo examen no es todo. Y no se debería usar el examen singular para juzgar una escuela y una comunidad. También tiene el beneficio de darnos información sobre cuáles escuelas van progresando, cómo va el sistema progresando y cuáles son los estudiantes que van mejorando y cuáles son los estudiantes que necesitamos más enfoque. Entonces es un día de celebración. Vamos a celebrar durante esta conferencia de prensa, pero después de esta conferencia a trabajar y a seguir sirviendo a nuestras comunidades por toda la ciudad de Nueva York. Muchísimas gracias. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
So we'll take questions first on these test scores. Chancellor, of course, will join me in answering questions, and Michelle Palladino, who's the Director of Research and Policy for DOE. Yes.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I wanted to ask what your reaction is to the stance from United Teachers, which kind of put out a statement.
Say again. This stands from what?
NISA, the United Teachers.
Oh, NISA, yeah.
Yeah, so they say the tests are too long. The questions are developmentally inappropriate and invalid scoring benchmarks. So what's your reaction to that?
Well, I'll start and then let the people who know more about testing and academics speak to you. But look, I think the fact is when we deal with the tests that we have, they tell us something. And I'm someone who believes that it was important to get away from an over-reliance on high-stakes testing. I think we've made real progress in this state and in this city. I think we have to keep working at it. I thoroughly believe in multiple measures. But even if there's some difference over the specific test, it still tells you something apples to apples, looking at how New York City has done against the rest of the state, looking at how New York City did this year against last year. So fair concerns, worthy of consideration, but that does not take away from the fact that we see some real progress here. You want to add?
Yes, so I would just say, just keep in mind that the assessments in New York State went from 3 days to 2 days, and that was directly as a result of what I give credit to the Commissioner, Commissioner Elia, for listening to the parent communities. We also know that teachers have been involved in developing these tests, so there's been teacher voice in the tests as well. And I echo what Mayor de Blasio has said about a culture of testing. We are not supportive of a culture of testing, yet at the same time, as the mayor who has responsibility for the public education system in New York City, he has to have a way of understanding whether or not students have mastered the standards that the state of New York says students must master every year. The only way to assess that is to gauge whether or not they've mastered those standards. So I'm incredibly excited that those test windows have shortened. I'm really excited that teacher voice has been included in the development of those assessments. And as we work with the state of New York, we're going to continue to push to make sure that they're developmentally appropriate, that they are not too long. And I'm going to ask everyone to keep in mind, use these results to give us an indicator of where we need to go, have students mastered standards, but do not use these test scores to judge a school versus another school. That's using a screwdriver to hammer in a nail. It's not the right tool. Don't do it.
Very visual, Richard. Dave.
Go for a hammer.
And not to concentrate just only on numbers, but for a second just to do that, the jump last year was much greater than the jump that we're seeing this year. It was up, I think, 6%, 5%, 6% for English, 5% up. They changed the test, I think. So can you do apples to apples yet? Are we seeing a trend? Is this a period long enough, or just really, I guess, 2 years to see a trend?
So I'm going to start. You and I often, I've known you a long time, we often ask the same questions. So the kind of questions you're asking, I'm often asking these folks in the days leading up to these things. So I'm going to start, but let greater experts jump in. First of all, a couple of years ago, they changed the test. So from last year's results to the year before, there was a question about comparability. We still thought there was some evident progress, but there still were some questions about comparability. This year we have, the same format that, last year, this exact time what we reported versus now, same format, apples to apples. So that's the first point. The second point is we're able to say something about pre-K because it's the first time we had it for a majority of our kids, and they're literally able to analyze what happened with the kids who had pre-K versus what happened to the kids who didn't in that same test. That same day when all those kids were taking the test, we saw a really meaningful difference between the kids who had pre-K and the kids who didn't. And that point about the achievement gap, Dave, the fact that we saw the amount of movement in terms of our young people of color, that's striking, knowing, again, that pre-K hadn't even gotten to universal, was just beginning. We thought it was high quality in the beginning, but we know it's higher quality now. And again, really thinking about the powerful impact that 3K will make. I mean, this is the beginning of something I think very, very big. So yeah, I do think this one tells us something more clearly in some ways than what we were able to say a year ago. Yes?
Mr. Mayor, I met Chancellor Carranza last August at the Charter School for Excellence in Parkchester. That school was performing 2 grades above the local public schools. I also asked Chancellor Carranza, why are Bronx public schools lower performing than the rest of the public schools in the city? His answer was, the mayor and I know that Bronx public schools aren't performing to where they should be. I'm new here. Give me a chance. I'll get back to you. It's been 1 year. He hasn't.
Well, he's gotten back to the people of the Bronx. Maybe you and he didn't speak.
Bronx public schools still underperforming, and what is the district?
Yeah, look, I think we unveiled the Bronx Plan. It was literally called the Bronx Plan. I think that speaks for itself about the ways that we were going to ensure the very best educators and the educators needed in schools in the Bronx that often had not been there in the past because educators chose, for a variety of reasons, not to be there in the schools that needed them the most. We've changed the dynamics, working with the union, to get the kind of educators we need, where we need them, when we need them, in the subjects we need them. I think that's going to have a huge impact, but I also think that overcoming the challenges the Bronx has faced, which has everything to do with economic inequality and racial inequality and a whole lot of other things in our society, Overcoming them, no one said it was going to happen instantly, but it is starting to happen. And things like pre-K, those investments disproportionately helped schools in the Bronx. And I think we're going to see year after year, particularly as the early childhood piece comes into play more, a disproportionately positive impact in the Bronx.
Yes, so I want to thank you for being here for our anniversary. It's good to see you again. 1 year. Where have you been? Look, if you look at the data, you're going to see in this year's disaggregated data that the schools in the Bronx, in terms of growth, outgrew most of the other boroughs in New York City. And when you look at the instructional leadership that's happening in the Bronx, the investments not only with the Bronx Plan, but the instructional leadership framework, when you're looking at the data disaggregation and how principals and teachers and communities are actually looking at students and then giving them the growth opportunities that they need, it's no wonder that we're seeing that kind of accelerated growth. Just get ready. The Bronx is on fire, and we can tell you that this year they're already starting to grow.
Now we're clapping, but I want to help Richard because he didn't grow up here. Once upon a time when you said the Bronx is on fire, it's not a good thing. So, you're a newcomer, so you're allowed. It's actually a statement of progress that we can say it and clap for it. That shows we've turned a page. Jill.
Can you tell us a little bit more about how you track the pre-K, this is the first cohort of pre-K for all? That looks like it's some data that is beyond what the state typically puts out or tracks. This question got asked earlier to the state.
Sure.
And you can really speak to it, but tell us a little bit about how that was tracked and what kinds of...
And what kinds of? Yeah, Michelle, why don't you come on in now? Michelle Palladino.
Not that tall. So we started with looking at the students in the first expansion cohort in 2014-15, and then essentially followed them through third grade. And when we compare the students who were in universal pre-K to the students who weren't, they performed higher. So for example, in ELA, they were 2.8 percentage points higher, and in math, 1.1 percentage points higher, which is exciting. But what's particularly exciting is when we break it down into the subgroups. Our black pre-K for all students were 7.2 percentage points higher in ELA and 6.2 percentage points higher in math. 6.5, excuse me, compared to white students within pre-K. So they were outpacing, and that's the sort of allusion that people were making to the closing of the achievement gap that we're seeing.
You had Latino numbers?
Oh, yes. So for Hispanic pre-K students, it was 7.2 percentage points higher in ELA and 6.2 percentage higher in math for pre-K versus not.
Will these numbers be available somewhere?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay, yes.
We know how many of the third graders tested went to the city's pre-K?
Yeah, so Michelle, I think that would be really helpful because we had this conversation yesterday. So I'll give you the layman's introduction and then pass to Michelle. So 53,000 kids in the 2014-15 school year got pre-K, got full day pre-K. But remember, in this very transient world we live in, a certain number of them, their families left town or they went to another different kind of school, whatever. New kids came in by the time of the third grade test. So it's not like 53,000 started and then 53,000 were taking the third grade test. So take it from there. How you were able to parse out the different
Yes,
students.
that's right. So of our grade 3 test takers, 43% were in universal pre-K. The other students were, those numbers don't include charters, for example. So some students moved into charter schools, some students moved into private schools, some students left the city, and then we saw a little bit of attrition every year because as the mayor said, it is a fairly fluid system.
Or any pre-K?
Yes.
I mean, is it fair to attribute, I'm sure it had something to do with closing the achievement gap, but 57% didn't go to pre-K.
Right.
So is it fair to attribute it all to pre-K?
Well, that's why we looked specifically at the pre-K versus not pre-K students, and I wasn't just talking about the grade 3 gap closing, which happened, but specifically comparing the pre-K versus not, and then looking within certain subgroups so that we could be a little bit more confident about those comparisons.
Okay, other questions on these test scores? Anything else on the test? Yes, please.
Did you like control for anything that would create like a disparity between those who enrolled in pre-K and those who didn't? Or you can imagine parents who are enrolling their kids in universal pre-K might be somehow different from those who didn't.
I have Michelle come over and speak as an expert. I want to make one layman's point. The scale here is important when you're talking about 53,000 kids to begin with. And again, even if some move on, et cetera, it still ends up being close to half of the kids who took the third grade test this last year. That's a whole lot of kids. So again, that's part of what gives us confidence that we're seeing something meaningful here and that we saw this much in the very first year. And just, I want everyone to hear this because we all believe this thoroughly. We expect great things ahead. This is like we're ready right now to do predictions that this first year would have been the time when you see the least, because each year it did get stronger because more and more kids got exposed to it, and then the amplifying effect of 3K. So this is the year that we probably were expecting to be the least impressed by, and it's still pretty amazing numbers, particularly when you look at the achievement gap and kids of color.